Good afternoon. I'm Jeremy Benamy, president of J Street here in Washington, D.C., and we are going to be having a conversation over the course of the next half hour or so with Congressman Jason Crow from Colorado. And I know that he is just leaving a meeting and getting settled in front of the location where his camera will go live. And so if you'll give us just a couple of minutes, first of all, we'll let everybody in out of the waiting room, and then we will make a live contact with the congressman, and we will get started with our conversation in just a couple of minutes. As we get settled, I may actually just go ahead and give everyone the background on the congressman so that we don't have to waste the time with him hearing his own bio. So again, this is going to be a conversation this afternoon with Congressman Jason Crow of Colorado. He represents the 6th District in Colorado and has been in Congress since 2018. He's a former Army Ranger and Bronze Star recipient, and he served in the 82nd Airborne Division and the 75th Ranger Regiment, both in Iraq and Afghanistan, rising to the rank of captain. He came back from his active service and became a lawyer in Colorado, and in fact was the pro bono lawyer of the year, helping service members in their transition from military to civilian life. Today, he is a member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. He's on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He's the ranking Democrat on Oversight and Accountability within the Foreign Affairs Committee. And I'll just say, before he formally gets on, although perhaps he can hear the audio, that he is one of the most, I would say, not just most thoughtful members of the United States Congress when it comes to, there you go. Perfect timing for him to hear the compliment. I just was reading your bio, Congressman, to give the folks a sense of you. And I had just reached the point where I was going to say that the Congressman is one of the most thoughtful members of the U.S. Congress on issues related to American national security and foreign policy. And you and I have had a chance to chat over the years. It's now, 6 or 7 years that we've known each other about a lot of these issues. We traveled together to Israel and Palestine. And I have just found what I've learned from you to be exceedingly enlightening and really helpful in thinking through American policy. And also, frankly, to think through what, as we think, for those of us that are caring deeply about Israel, what are Israel's options? And I think you have some wisdom to be shared there as well. So I have read your bio and given you all the compliments in the introduction, and it's really great of you to join us. I appreciate that. And we've got about 400 or 500 people here with us today, and I think we're really anxious to hear your thoughts. And I have a whole series of questions, believe me, that I'm going to ask you. But before we get started, I want to just give you a chance to say a few opening words and hear any thoughts you might have at this moment after the horrific events of October 7th and the terrible fighting and damage we're seeing now in Gaza. So I thought I'd give you a chance to open up, and then we'll engage in a dialogue.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with all of you. J Street has been a wonderful partner and a thought partner in my time in Congress, and certainly in the last 3+ weeks as we sort through what is frankly, the most complicated national security and foreign policy challenge that I have encountered in my time in Congress. So I appreciate your friendship and your thought partnership as we sort through this issue with, frankly, no good alternatives right now. Just a series of bad ones, but also needs to mitigate a cascading effect and kind of second and third order potential effects from all of this. So appreciate that and appreciate J Street, but also just you personally as well, Jeremy. And then the second thing is I just ended a roundtable with Jewish leaders from Colorado, where I heard a lot about the surge in anti-Semitism, the surge in hate. So I just wanted to express my solidarity to the Jewish community, to Colorado and American Jews and Jews around the world. That I stand with all of you. I will do everything in my power to fight that, to combat hate, to combat anti-Semitism. It's changing and rapidly evolving, but there is just no place for it in any movement. I look forward to working with all of you to figure out how we address that and how I can lead and be the partner that you all need. But just to frame the issue, number one, I want to say at the outset that there is a need to defend Israel and the Jewish homeland. There is a need to defeat Hamas, and I'll comment and we'll talk about how I think we achieve that, because it's not enough to just say Hamas must be defeated. The manner in which that happens, in the timing of in which that happens, and the sequence is just as important, if not more, as just stating the goal, right? It's easy to state the goal. It's much, much harder, obviously, to put that into effect and make that happen successfully, as the United States learned over our 20 years combating terrorism, spending $3 trillion and countless lives, and frankly, our credibility over the global war on terrorism doing that. So we have some lessons to draw upon there. A third is returning of the hostages, making sure that we put a construct in place to get safely back as many hostages as possible. Fourth is containing the conflict. We are at a point in time right now where the danger of this cascading rapidly out of control and getting much, much worse and becoming a regional conflict involving Iran, Lebanon, and Hezbollah is certainly the highest it's been in decades, if not ever. The United States is surging resources into the region. We're going to take up the supplemental bill this week, which is going to be really important in terms of what deterrence looks like. How do we contain this? But a larger conflagration involving Iran, Lebanon, and Hezbollah would be devastating for everybody, civilians, Israel, for everybody in the region, U.S. troops in our presence there. And then really importantly, overlaying all of this is the protection of civilians and humanitarian aid, right? We have to make sure that we are leading with our values, and we're being consistent with the application of those values. And if I learned anything in my time in combat, it's that no military mission or imperative can be achieved unless protection of civilians and innocents in all their backgrounds is put front and center. That it is imperative to the accomplishment of the mission, and obviously a moral imperative as well. So those are the things that I'm thinking about, that I'm working through with you and others as we try to figure out the path forward here. And obviously would love to take it in the direction you want to take it, Jeremy, and take questions from you or others.
Terrific. Well, thanks so much for that. I guess, where I would start is you've articulated some of the interests, and let's say the American interests in this situation. How do you think the Biden administration is doing in the first 3.5 weeks in terms of sort of articulating a set of policies that lead us towards the interests you've articulated?
I would like to see the Biden administration be more proactive on the issue of the humanitarian needs in the region, because I see how the humanitarian needs have merged significantly with the military and national security needs. We just cannot. I mean, this is about Israel and the region, but it's also about our global leadership. It's also about how the global South, which is essential to our national security and foreign policy, views this conflict. And of course, it's also about the nexus between Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China, and the merging of those powers to try to re-establish a different world order. So I would like to see that broader discussion about how human rights is foundational to national security, and that the manner in which you go about something, like I said in the beginning, is just as important as what you do. I'm somebody who I've sat on the Armed Services Committee for a number of years, and I passed a bill a number of years ago to create the Civilian Harm Mitigation Program, and to create a center of excellence within the Department of Defense on mitigation of civilian harm and reduction of civilian casualties. Because in my time fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, I saw how when you don't put mitigation of civilian harm and protection of innocence front and center, you're actually creating more of a problem than you are ever solving the problem. Like you can go after and kill as many terrorists as you want, but if you're creating civilian harm in the process, obviously you're multiplying the problem, and you can do that forever. So I led efforts internally within the Department of Defense and we'll continue to do that, but we have to have that broader discussion.
So you mentioned as one of the objectives, quote unquote, defeating Hamas. And, the term that I've been trying to use, because I think it's important to say one can't eradicate or destroy permanently a political movement that has an ideology. And Hamas is an outgrowth of fundamentalist political Islam. And that's itself not going to be defeated. That will always be there as a thread of politics and ideology within Arab and Palestinian communities. But the operational control that this horrible organization has over this piece of territory, that is a legitimate goal. The question is, given the humanitarian concerns that you've expressed, and J Street backs you up 100% on that, do you see a strategic or tactical approach that Israel could pursue that achieves the goal of removing Hamas from operational control while not inflicting an unacceptable level of harm on the civilian population of Gaza?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. If 20 years fighting terror has shown us anything, is that you cannot defeat a terror organization or an ideology with military force, period. What you can do with the use of a military is you can contain it to some degree, and you can degrade it. And then you buy yourself time to then ultimately remove the base of support, right? Both the ideological, the monetary, the human base of support from that terror organization. So there is no way for the IDF or any other military, for that matter, to destroy Hamas. It's a matter of containing and degrading it and isolating it, while you then pursue a political, government resolution to Gaza and the West Bank. That's my pretty ardent view based on my experience. So, there are a variety of, right now we're obviously in a very difficult emotional state, right? And there's a lot of question about, I often hear the debate, well, Israel shouldn't do anything, or Israel should sweep through Gaza and do a total sweep. I think there is a way to do this, to do a containment and degradation of Hamas, while you then have a very robust effort to engage diplomatically, the Abraham Accord countries, the others in the region, in a much more honest, rigorous way, try to establish a Palestinian state that's viable. And that will take decades, if not generations, but we have to start that path. We have to give those folks hope to actually remove that support ultimately from Hamas and make it a non-viable option for the Palestinian people, who, of course, are victims of Hamas as well. So that's my view of how you do it. Now, there's a couple of different proposals. I know there was a proposal floating around by Naftali Bennett that would actually call for, separating Gaza into the north and south, creating a line of demarcation with several humanitarian corridors that would be controlled by the IDF to ensure that military equipment isn't flowing north, but that you have freedom of movement for people moving south. If you have a then 2-kilometer humanitarian buffer zone, and you're allowing for that freedom of movement, you're allowing for folks to flee the fighting, while also allowing a very precise and sustained counter-terror campaign that would largely take the form of a special operations campaign, of which I've conducted. And I think that is a preferred method rather than kind of a large-scale sweep, which I think would cause a substantial international blowback, could potentially derail efforts to normalize relations between Israel and some of the regional countries, and then obviously militarily would be extremely difficult to achieve.
Yeah, and one of the pieces that you mentioned is sort of the question of the political horizon, so that the ideology of Hamas needs to be shrunk, and the adherence to that ideology must be shrunk, and part of that is having an alternative that people can then turn to. And one of the options that we've been laying out, and you mentioned the Abraham Accords countries, and the others in the region, of course. I mean, the Egyptians and the Jordanians are the immediate neighbors of Israel and have the closest relationship and the most immediate interest. And so it's UAE and Morocco, but it's also the countries that are at peace with Israel, and it's the potential Abraham Accords countries. One of the things we've been suggesting is the consideration of getting those countries to agree under United Nations auspices to, when the fighting has reached a point that operational control by Hamas has been degraded and that threat has been reduced, that the operational control of Gaza is turned over to a trusteeship of countries from the region under UN auspices, and then a flow of resources, a Marshall Plan, as they, that seems to be the thing that we all understand, right? It's this large inflow of resources, and using that not only for an economic development opportunity, but also to reconstruct the infrastructure of statehood. The Palestinian Authority on the West Bank did a great job 10 years ago under Salam Fayyad of getting ready for statehood, and then there wasn't statehood. And so that all disintegrated, and now you have a relatively dysfunctional, corrupt authority, and that needs to be rebuilt too, at the same time that you're rebuilding Gaza. And so, is that kind of vision something that you think can possibly work with the kind of special operations force and this degrading over the months ahead of Hamas's military capability?
Yeah, no, I do like your proposal, Jeremy, and I think that's spot on, right? We're going to have to hold some of those other regional powers' feet to the fire, frankly, who have been resistant to really engage meaningfully, I think. But they have to also be recognizing, and I think they are, in some of my discussions and in some of the meetings I've been in, that the status quo is not good for them either, right? And the risk of a regional conflict is really bad for Jordan, for Egypt, for the Saudis, for the Qataris, for the Emiratis, and that the status quo is unacceptable. It is not going to work. So certainly incentivizing them to establish some type of protectorate or trusteeship, I think, is the obviously path. And you can do both, right? We're going to have to do both, because the consequences of just a military-focused campaign, it's not going to work. It's just not going to work. It's going to blow back, and it's going to put peace. If you just do that without the parallel path that converges with a diplomatic solution, with giving hope to the Palestinian people for a state and an actual defined roadmap to achieve that, then it will continue to get worse, in my estimation.
So I wonder, I have a question for you about this roadmap and this hope. Again, all terminology has been degraded over time because roadmap has its own history and
Yes.
baggage, with the
You can quickly turn into a NATO discussion here. So
yeah, but the idea of laying out a vision, and providing not only the Palestinian people with a vision of what, potentially, if this violence, ends in the conceivable future, that there is a future beyond it. But also, I think, giving some signposts for an Israeli opposition to the right-wing concept that somehow, we can have all the land and, perhaps we can shrink the conflict or manage it, but, to actually resolve it, you need that hope, you need that vision of what the point on the horizon is that you're headed to, and you need a roadmap to get there. The question of timing that I have for you is, I feel like this is something that the president or the secretary of state or somebody could be laying out in the nearer term, because if you lay out that vision, it gives you more space to do some of the things that are needed to be done. There's a hesitancy from the White House about public discourse, and I'm curious what your thinking is about the benefit of a public vision of where we're trying to get, as opposed to sort of keeping it all quiet and behind the scenes.
Well, I mean, the ultimate challenge, and you know this better than I do, is that the United States doesn't have a viable partner in Netanyahu to engage in that discussion and to create that vision, right? It can't be something that we're mandating, that we're saying this is what you must do. There has to be a discussion about what's possible, what the ultimate goal will be, which will be a two-state solution. Which for the last couple of years, people have said that dream is gone, that there's just no way to achieve it. Well, it's got to not be gone, right? We have to revive it. because we've seen that none of this is tenable. And there is going to be some very, very hard decisions and discussions about the nature of settlements and rolling back settlements and settler violence that is going to have to be checked to get on that path and provide that hope for Israelis and for Palestinians that they both so desperately need. But we also need a viable partner to engage in that discussion, and right now we don't have it.
Right. It's part of why you did talk about this in terms of not only just months and years, but you used the term decades and generations, which, for some of us, we don't have that much time, but it is definitely a long-term process. And one step along that road is going to be political change in Israel. And I think part of the thinking about political change there is going to be that the people looking to provide that change have to have an alternative vision. I think, giving if an American president and leaders here put out an alternative vision, it gives the other camp in Israel something to then rally around, say, choose us because we're going to lead to this future. And you wrap it together with the vision of the Abraham Accords. And, that ultimately Israel just turned 75. By the time it turns 100, it should have borders, right? The country doesn't have borders. That'd be a nice thing to have as a country on its 100th anniversary. It should have regularized relations with every single country in the neighborhood. It should have peace with the other people who want to claim the land. I mean, that's sort of a vision for the 100th anniversary and something that a political movement in Israel could rally around. But somebody has to put that vision out there in a sense and say, this is possible. And, I sort of think it's very hard to fight a war when the only vision is revenge, that's not really going to lead you anywhere, that there just has to be something that you're fighting for. And so, that is part of the case that I would make. So you and I have discussed a little bit, what's possible to say out loud publicly and where can the United States lead with vision? And this is one of the things that I'd love to see the president do more of.
This issue of time is such a fascinating part of the discussion because over and over again in the foreign policy context, certainly, there's this dynamic where long time horizons are used as an excuse for inaction, right? Because something is so long, it's very hard, certainly in our American minds, to wrap our brain around it, right? Where we live off of 24-hour news cycles. We run our businesses based on quarterly earnings reports. We're in constant political re-election campaign cycles at this point. So this idea of generational or decades-long change is something that's very hard for us to comprehend. And I remember in my time fighting in Afghanistan, first of all, there's this statement in the Middle East and certainly in Afghanistan as well, that Americans have all the watches, but we have all the time. And it's certainly relevant today. And in an extension of that, I remember sitting around, I was meeting with a bunch of tribal elders very, very deep in the provinces of southeastern Afghanistan. And I was trying to convince them to, kind of come our way and to, ally themselves with us as opposed to the Taliban. And I remember they said, Captain Crow, you're going to rotate out of here in 3 months, but my children and my grandchildren will be fighting this conflict. So what can you possibly guarantee me or give me that would make me side with you? And it is this reminder that in some of these conflicts, and certainly we see it here in stark contrast or in stark reality, rather, there has to be a longer time horizon with, as you said, those benchmarks and achievables along the way, so people can see progress happening. But this is going to take a long, long time.
Yeah, no, I think I'm just following some of the questions in the chat from people who are watching, and I think that one of the critiques of this kind of a vision is Oslo and Rabin and Clinton, 93, 94 through 2000 sort of had this vision, but it created a process and endless talks, and there, was never actually, you never knew where you were going, and you didn't get to the end. And I do think that there's a very legitimate critique of that, but that's again why I think it's so important for the president to say up front, there will be a state of Palestine. That at the end of the day, this is where this is headed, and all of these regional partners understand that their normalization of relations with Israel is dependent on that, and it will be a part and parcel, and that gives people something more concrete to hold on to. I also think there was another question in the chat that relates to anti-Semitism, which you just raised at the beginning, and without question, all of us are experiencing that there is a dramatic rise in just these past few weeks in real serious physical threat, intimidation, fear. I have 2 kids on college campus. I know their friends and other campuses are feeling it more than they are at their specific campus, but it's quite tangible out there right now. I think that if the war is seen as an attempt to just destroy Gaza, and destroy Hamas and its revenge and vengeance of a first world military against a, quote unquote, movement fighting for its freedom, anti-Semitism is just going to go through the roof. But if it's understood that this is a, necessary military operation to degrade the capacities of a group that is nihilistic and has no view of the future, this is also a part of the answer that it becomes less toxic because you have a vision and a hope and a future, and you're trying to build something. So I think it's part of the fight against anti-Semitism in its own way too.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. There is a connectivity to that, as you point out, and it kind of goes to our earlier discussion about the global implications of that, right? The United States, as an ally of Israel, obviously needs to make sure we're maintaining our obligations to Israel and its security, but we have obligations around the world in a lot of different respects, and certainly we're seeing public sentiment shift rapidly in this regard, and in large part, it's going to continue to shift based on what happens in the next couple of weeks and months, I think.
So I have 2 more questions for you. I just want to make sure your time is okay, because we didn't actually connect with your team beforehand. Do you have a?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So first question is on the topic that's front and center for a lot of more activist folks in our ranks, which is the question of ceasefire. And J Street has used the phrase, and so has the president and the UN and others, humanitarian pause versus calling for a ceasefire. And it seems like a very Washington speak insider, kind of difference. I believe there's a very significant difference between the two. And I'm curious, from your perspective, when asked what is the difference between calling for a ceasefire and calling for a humanitarian pause, what would be the answer that you would provide?
Yeah, no, the words matter a lot, and I have not used the ceasefire language, because the ceasefire language, as I understand it, and it's been used historically, is when you have 2 warring parties that are capable and willing to honor a ceasefire, right? And the willing, there's 2 parts: the capability and the willingness. And my belief is, when you're dealing with a terrorist organization that by definition does not follow rules, does not subscribe to international bodies, does not, terror does not follow those obligations or honor those obligations. And then the capability is another part of it. You're not dealing with a nation state in a very rigid command structure. In this instance with Hamas, Hamas is not a monolith. You have splinter groups, you have offshoots. It's a loose affiliation in a lot of ways. So even if you got one element of that to agree to a quote unquote ceasefire, obviously that would not necessarily be honored by other elements. That's why I have used the humanitarian pause language, because the humanitarian pause language is unilateral. That's something that Israel would do on its own, recognizing both the military challenges, the timing challenges, and the connection between humanitarian needs of the innocent Palestinians and its ultimate national security and defense goals, and the merger of those 2. In this instance, a pause is necessary because I think additional efforts to retrieve hostages is important. Number two, we need to set up the structure to allow Palestinians to evacuate from areas where there's going to be fighting. Number three, I would like to see a more defined battle plan by the Israelis, frankly, because we are going to support that. We are going to fund that. I'm going to be asked this week, potentially, to take a vote to, in large part, fund this operation, right? And the American people and taxpayers deserve to understand how that money is being used, and it's in furtherance of our national security interests and the interests of Israel as well. And right now, I don't have that information. So for all of those reasons, I think, and I guess the fourth would be, there's very little risk to slowing down here, because we do need to bolster Israel's defenses in some way. So, Iron Dome defenses, but at the same time, slowing down does not jeopardize the operation. Hamas is already dug in. Gaza is already this terrible fortress for urban fighting. That's not going to change, if we slow this down and get the humanitarian situation a little bit under control and help develop a plan to do this in a better, more deliberate way.
Yeah, no, and I really think that's such an important comment, that this is, absolutely in no way standing in the way of any strategic objective that we might support. And in fact, I believe, and it sounds like you would agree, that it might assist in reaching the objectives if you just sort of take that pause, make sure these needs are met, and the negotiations for hostages are given a little bit more time. So I do.
There's something you use there's actually this pause language is something that's in military doctrine as well for the United States. We actually call it tactical pauses. Right? When you're in a firefight, you're in a battle. What's really important is that battle evolves. Sometimes you take a tactical pause to assess what the next step is, because you understand that every time you take a step, you lock yourself into a course of action, and that can put you down a path that you don't want to be on. So these tactical pauses allow you to collect yourself, to assess the broader picture, to slow things down slightly, and make sure that your next step is putting you on a path to achieving your ultimate goal.
Perfect. Well, you hinted at the question of the vote that you're going to be asked to take. The president submitted a request to Congress for a supplemental appropriation that was a massive $106 billion, and it wrapped together aid for Ukraine, it wrapped together aid for Israel, it had other aspects of security and military assistance that related to Taiwan, and it included humanitarian aid, about 10 billion plus globally for humanitarian aid, and that isn't specified in the request, but one knows that it includes Ukraine, it includes Palestinians, it includes Israel. In return, instead of that, the Republican leadership has put forward a $14 billion package that would only have military aid to Israel, none of the other pieces, and would have a very unusual thing, which is that they propose a pay for, a source of revenue, which is to roll back one of the signature elements of the Inflation Reduction Act, which is funding the IRS to go after millionaire tax cheats. So this is a very, clearly politically motivated step. I'm curious from your perspective, how do you intend to vote if that particular proposal comes to the floor? And how do you see moving then ahead to try to get to a package that actually reflects a balanced, American policy that advances the goals you were outlining before?
Well, I certainly don't support the House Republican proposal as it's currently structured. There's no doubt about that, for three reasons, some of which you just mentioned. One is that this is a stark departure from precedent. The precedent is when there are national emergencies, whether they be natural disasters, national security emergencies, need to supplement our forces overseas, that we come together in a bipartisan way and we figure that out. And this would be a massive departure from that history and that precedent that I don't want to set. Secondly, it is gratuitously politicizing this issue by actually the pay for taking a very, very politically fraught issue and inserting it into the discussion here. So they're just outright politicizing it, in addition to departing from longstanding precedent on issues of foreign policy and national security. Then, of course, the third is the restructuring this, taking it out of the bill from Ukraine and border and national security, which I also disagree with, because I think these are all connected. There are very urgent national security needs vis-a-vis Ukraine that I think are also in the best interest of the American people, and they need to move forward as well. And there's also a deep connection between Iran and Russia that's really at play here as well, that is important that we address for Israel's security as well. So I would like to see that larger omnibus bill move forward in a bipartisan way. And by the way, I think that if that were put to a vote on the House floor today, it would pass with probably a 3/4 majority. About half of the Republican conference would vote for it because in July, about half of the Republican conference voted for something very similar. So the question is obviously getting it to the floor for a vote, as we all know.
Right. And the Senate's going to have, its own say on all of this. And I imagine the bill that hopefully Schumer and McConnell will put forward will be a little bit more like the president's request. The only other thing I'd add into your list of three, and I like to speak in threes too, so unfortunately this is a fourth, is the humanitarian assistance. And I think that in terms of the way that you open things up and how the U.S. positions itself as it provides significant military assistance to Israel, it's vital that it be providing significant humanitarian assistance that is ultimately going to reach the Palestinian population as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said, and that's a good catch. We always have to attach that to anything that's
you can fold that into point three, by the way, so you can still have 3 points. Fold that in as 3.
You're giving me a mea culpa on that one.
Well, listen, Congressman, I hope that everybody watching, and I notice, numbers for our webinars tend to go down over time, and this one only went up, which I think indicates that people were really interested in the comments that you had to say. I really appreciate your wisdom. I said this to you in your office last week. I said, I want more people to hear what you have to say. And, you really say it so well. You've got such a clear eye on strategy and American interest and the right way to move things forward. And so I appreciate your leadership. I look forward to continuing to work with you. And thank you very much for being with us and for your partnership.
No, thank you, Jeremy. Appreciate everything that you and J Street does, and look forward to continuing to work with you on this. And thank you to everyone who's joining as well.
Terrific. Okay. All the best.
Okay. Thank you.